Hey guys, so I recorded a new episode of a podcast, and this one is a doozy. I'm gonna just let you guys know right out of the gate. This is a 3-hour podcast, and in this 3 hours, I pretty much told the unabridged story of my life, hitting all of the traumatic points heavily. So some of this is going to be tough for you to listen to, but I suggest that you do watch the whole thing. If you need to break it up into chunks, like I suggest you do that. But I would say that this is an episode that you need to watch if the rest of them are going to make sense. And if any of you have ever had small interactions with me outside of this, stream and you know me in real life, but you've been a little bit more curious about where I came from or why I am the way that I am, this episode will shed a lot of light on that situation for you. So anyway, just want to give you guys the quick run through. I talked about the things that have bothered me the most and have caused me the most trauma in my life. And this is sort of like a therapy episode. And that's usually what these podcasts were historically when I was doing the MI stuff podcast back in the day. It was literally just me kind of trauma dumping, because I never really cared to go to traditional therapy or anything like that. So this is what that became. But anyway, I just want to give you guys a complete heads up. We are going to be getting silly. We are going to be getting funny in these episodes, but I wanted to go ahead and get all of the gloomy, dark stuff out of the way right out of the gate. And I'm calling them Yonder Talks right now. If you guys have any better ideas of a cool podcast name, I'm not married to Yonder Talks yet. But if I can't think of anything better, or if that's fine, we're just going to go with that. Because that's exactly what it is. It's just me talking. But yeah, just know that I cover a lot of stuff in this. I go over my relationship with my mother, who a lot of you guys have heard me talk about in real life or on streams. I also went through my first sexual experiences and why they were problematic. And I talk about a lot of dark stuff, basically. So just wanted to give you guys a heads up. That's what you're getting into. And like I said, I'll repeat it. Cut it up in chunks. Watch a little bit and then come back to it later on. And, but I do suggest that you get to the end of it because I just think it's necessary to understand who I am as a person going forward in this journey we're all going to be taking together. Please like the video. Please subscribe to the channel. Please follow the podcast everywhere podcasts are available. And if you guys want to contribute monetarily, there's YouTube memberships. There's Patreon that are options as well. And there's if you ever see me live streaming, there's donation options in there. Not to be a shill, but let's be honest. This has been the goal the whole time. And now that we're able to be monetized, I'd be a fool to not capitalize on that. Anyway, thank you guys so much for being here, and welcome to episode number 1 of Yonder Talks. Enjoy it. You know, anytime you go to embark on something, I think necessary to your journey, that far too often our brains will make up excuses as to why we should postpone that thing or why we should put it off, or all of these doubtful reasons why this thing could go wrong or why we shouldn't take that step or whatever have you. But sometimes overcoming that thought is the win that the universe wants to give you. And that is with W-I-N, not wind, but the win that the universe wants to give you. Maybe overcoming that thought is it saying, are you ready to do this thing? And I guess me being here right now and you watching this thing means that I am ready. It is about 7 o'clock in the morning here on Sunday morning in sunny Austin, Texas. And I'm doing things a little bit different than I normally do. So I wonder, I guess the best place that we should start this thing is at the very beginning. So for those of you who are not new here, sit through this part for the sake of those who are new here. My name is Kelsey Hudgens. I'm 37 years old. I am from Bennettsville, South Carolina, by way of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, now living in Austin, Texas. And I was a professional musician in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina for a very long time, and decided to wrap up that portion of my life and move to Austin, Texas to pursue a career in comedy, which has been a pretty damn good idea so far. I'm pretty confident in saying right now. But basically, I've done podcasts for a really long time when I lived back in Myrtle Beach, and I hadn't been doing proper podcasts ever since, and I'm sure that this is probably boring the absolute shit out of you, and forgive me for that, but this is necessary in sort of knowing who I am and how this thing operates in here, which I think is the point of these podcasts, is to kind of give you a little insight on how a person's brain operates and the way that they think and reason. And so I'm not going to apologize anymore for doing the weird things that I do. I'm just going to be myself and ramble myself into making points that I didn't know about myself. And you guys are just going to be witness to this journey that I'm going to take in my own mind, if that's okay with you guys. And if it's not okay with you guys, well, I guess now's the time to cut the video off. Be sure to drink your water, folks. Stay hydrated. So let's start this story off at the very beginning. I was born to, I think, parents who weren't ready for a child. And because of that, I ended up spending a lot of time at my grandparents' house, and my grandparents inevitably raised me along with my dad, who was around. My dad was definitely there every day at my grandmother's house, but it was like I would stay at my granny's and my pa's house. My Aunt Marie lived there as well. And so I lived with them growing up. Grandparents basically raised me. They were Depression-era folk. And grew up very religious, spent a lot of time in church. I should backtrack a little bit. I'm going to explain. I'm going to basically utilize this, and maybe I'll put a nice little snippet at the beginning of this video explaining what it is so that I can just get to the story of pretty much how I became to be. And I just feel like I should let you guys know that that's what this is. I'm going to basically just tell you guys a quick story of my life. And that's going to be the first episode of whatever I decide to call this thing that I'm doing. Anyway. Raised very religious. My grandmother was very active in the church. She was the treasurer of our local church. My granddad owned a used car lot on our at our house. He owned a pretty successful heating and air business that my dad inherited when my granddad retired. And he was also a musician, a lifelong musician, my granddad was, and incredible. I mean, when I describe it, everybody says, oh, of course, you're going to think the person in your family is the greatest. But, like, I am very critical of things and people, and especially music. And you have to just trust me when I tell you that my granddad was one of the greatest musicians on earth during his era, for sure. He played with a lot of old school country guys that not a lot of people would have heard of, like Ernest Tubb. He played with Marty Robbins. He played with a guy named Jim Nesbitt. So a few guys who had pretty popular country hits back in the day. In the 60s and 70s, my granddad played with all those guys. And that's where I got my musicianship from initially. I believe in my genes, it definitely came from his side of the family. But anyway. So, like I said, born to parents who probably weren't prepared for children at that point in their life, but big ups to my dad for he was there. He was definitely a part of my life. He was always around at my grandmother's house, and it wasn't the type of thing like you hear about a grandmother raising the child, and you immediately think, oh wow, two deadbeat parents, which is absolutely not the case. My mother, 1,000% a deadbeat. I'm sure we're going to go into that because every conversation has to lead back to that somehow. And I don't know why, but we're going to go back to that, I'm sure. Anyway, so my mother left me and my dad when I was 2 years old. My mom had an affair on my dad with the man who then became my stepdad. And growing up with my grandparents, like my mom would, she was supposed to pick me up from school every Wednesday, and I got every weekend with her. So she was supposed to pick me up Wednesdays and then Friday and then bring me back on Sunday. And that was the deal because my dad was awarded custody. And you guys know that the courts always favor the mother in most custody battles and things like that. That wasn't my case. My dad had custody of me, and that just goes to show what a specimen my mother was. In 1988, for the courts to award custody to my dad, sole custody. Anyway, it was their choice to let me stay at my grandmother's house because even then I would cry if I were anywhere other than my grandmother's house. I would just cry hysterically until someone brought me home. Like I couldn't even stay over at friends' houses. I couldn't even do like camp outs at my friends' houses or whatever because I would always just end up freaking out and crying, and they'd have to call and somebody had to come pick me up, and it was always like a thing. And fast forward a bunch until a couple years ago when I talked to a therapist who is not. I've never done traditional. Well, I guess I did when I was a child for other reasons, but like I haven't done therapy as an adult. That's sort of what this is going to be for me, which is what my podcast always was when I did it back in the old days. By the way, if you guys want to go listen to any of the old podcasts, but it's all still here on my YouTube channel. Go find that and watch it. A shameless plug in the middle of the fucking thing. Anyway, I never did therapy in my adult life, but I had a very close friend from back home who's also a musician that I did some really fun gigs with, who is a therapist and retired therapist. And he told me that just from some things that I had posted online and from knowing who I was back home, he could tell that I suffered from something called agoraphobia, which now we know has a name and is a thing, but it's basically I have a fear that something is going to go wrong if I leave my place of comfort, and I am convinced of this, and I am so convinced that it really prevents me from being able to participate in certain things that I would really like to be a part of, like hanging out with friends and stuff like that. But mine is coupled with panic, so that after a certain amount of time, it sort of like induces a panic attack. Like the longer I stay away from the place that I have marked as my safe space, and this all sounds very, very progressive, for lack of a word that I want to say. But all of this stuff stems back from when I was a child and just not wanting to be anywhere where I felt uncomfortable. Even as a child, I had this tendency to where I would want to... I was never comfortable unless I was home. Like I could go and play at a friend's house or whatever and have a good time or whatever. When it came time to go to sleep, I needed to be home. And that's just all there was to it. And it got to the point where even when my mom would come pick me up, that I would cry when I got home with her, and then they would have to like get me, like bring me home, which is like a 30-minute drive. And my grandmother used to say that she would wake up in the middle of the night to my mom tapping on her window to wake her up so that she could take me back because I wouldn't stop crying. And that was when I was like a very, very young baby. And I say when my mom would pick me up because there would be times, by the way, this is getting into the murky waters. Probably also mentioned this in that preamble that I'm going to have to record to put at the beginning of all of this stuff, since this is going to be released and not streamed live, which is absolutely abnormal to the things I normally do. I always have a chat to interact with. This is not that. This is just my mind, just my thoughts. And shout out to my friend, the great and powerful Ryer Cameraman, for suggesting that I do this sort of thing, because I think it's really nice that she does this. And I think it's very helpful for me to get back into it after I've taken such a hiatus, if you will, from doing this sort of thing. Anyway, I mentioned that when my mother would pick me up, because there would be times when she was supposed to pick me up, but she wouldn't. There were times that I was at school, and it was Wednesday, and she wasn't there to pick me up, and she hadn't let anybody else know that she wasn't going to be there to pick me up. And I was just there at school waiting for somebody to come get me, and it was weird. And I just remember being a kid thinking it was strange, and how the grown-ups were like treating me a different way, and because of this sort of a situation. And even not at school, but like even at my grandmother's house, my stepmom brought up a thing about whenever I was a kid, she said that she just remembered it broke her heart. My stepmom said this, to see me sitting out on the front, like this is like out of a movie. But she said she saw me sitting out on the front porch waiting with my little suitcase next to me. Like I was sitting in the house waiting. And then like, I remember she said that I wanted to go outside and sit on the porch because maybe she couldn't see me if I was in the house. So I needed to go outside so that she could see that I was ready. And she said that just broke her heart to know that I was doing that and not expecting it. And then I would remember my mom would call after she didn't pick me up. And, she would call and make excuses from why she couldn't pick me up. But my grandmother would specifically allow me to stay up later on those nights. And when my mom would call, she would hand me the phone, and my mom would have to explain to me, why she wasn't picking me up. And in that point in my life, I was just enthralled with the idea of a mother, because I called my granny Mama because everybody at the house called her Mama. My Aunt Marie, my Uncle Roger, my dad, Aunt Becky, they all called her Mama, and they were all like, we were the kind of family. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. This is very, very, well, I guess it's not just prevalent in the South. It's prevalent everywhere, I'm sure. But in the South specifically, there's like one home base, like grandmother's house or granny's house, where everybody goes and hangs out. Like, that's the meeting place. But around our house, like, that was a thing every day. Like, every single morning, my Uncle Roger was at the house. My dad was at the house. And my grandmother was making very large breakfasts every morning. And it was the kind of thing to where, it was the kind of thing, where it was the meeting place for everybody. And I think that's why it was comfortable for me, because I could just tell how comfortable everyone else was there. And it was easy for me to mark that as my, like, territory. Like, this is, and I don't want to say safe space, because that's been adopted by such ridiculous ideologies in recent years. But I'm going to use that term. Don't judge me. Or do, I don't care. But it was just, everybody was always there. And it was incredible. It was like, every day was like the greatest day. And we would always, every night, would end up watching something fun on TV or playing Yahtzee until it just got too late and they made me go to bed, or learning how to play cards. Like, my grandmother taught me how to play poker, taught me how to play spades. We played Uno. We put puzzles together. Like, it was a fun house. And my Aunt Marie, who is an integral part in my story, she was 13 years older than me. So whenever my mom left my dad, my Aunt Marie was 15 years old. She was getting her driver's license, and she was the one who, like, kind of stepped up as, like, she pretty much was, hey, I'm kind of gonna do this. I'm gonna help raise this kid. And she did an incredible job. And she also, my dad credits her with helping raise all of his kids, because she really was the coolest. But anyway, more about Marie shortly. I remember early on just being enthralled with the idea of a mother and having one that was actually my mom. And I just remembered always seeking her approval in a huge way. And she never really had much to do with me. And to be honest, she didn't pick me up a lot. There was more times when she didn't pick me up than when she did, for a certain amount of years. And I remember I'm going to fast forward a bit. Like there were some crazy things that happened childhood wise that I don't really go into, and you can put the pieces together and figure all that shit out for yourself. It's the kind of thing we don't like to talk about. So we're going to belay that conversation for now because, to be honest, I don't think I've properly talked about it in front of any recorded thing. I've not talked about this in a recorded manner. And I think I want to keep it that way for a little bit longer, but just do the math. But then when I was 8 years old, my Aunt Marie. Okay, when I was 8 years old, I was selling candy for World's Finest Chocolate for my school, and I got to walk into the house down the road, the farthest house from my house that was on the same road, and there was like two fields. There was usually one cotton, one soy on either side, and I was walking to the house that owned all these fields. My Aunt Marie pulled up in her car and said, "Jump on the trunk of the car and I'll just ride down there and you can jump off. I'll give you a ride down there, but just jump on the trunk." So I was like, cool, let's do that. I jumped on the trunk. Anyway, long story short, I end up falling off of the car, and I hit my head pretty hard, and I ended up having a blood clot inside my brain. I think an aneurysm is the technical term for that. But they rushed me to the hospital in my hometown, Marlboro Park Hospital, the hospital I was born in, which doesn't even exist anymore. Fun fact, they closed down the hospital that I was born in like pretty much the same month that they opened a Walmart. I don't know if those are correlated, but you can get Band-Aids and such from Walmart, so why have a hospital anymore? Anyway, they took me to Marlboro Park Hospital, and they said, there's nothing we can do. We're not equipped to handle this. We have to rush him to McLeod in Florence. Florence, South Carolina is the big city next to my city that has the, that's the big city that I have to tell everybody I'm from that doesn't know my area. So in the ambulance between Marlboro Park Hospital and McLeod Hospital in Florence, I flatlined 3 times, and they had to shock me back to life. So there was just a thing that was going around that, hey, I died 3 times. And that was all my family. My family would say stuff like, yeah, Kelsey died 3 times and came back. And it was true. Like, I flatlined 3 times, and they brought me back. But once all of that happened, I got to the hospital in Florence, and immediately, like, they shaved my head. They popped a hole in my skull to relieve the pressure, and then they did this. In fact, you can kind of see it. Let me see. It goes right here, and around. You can like see it come through on my forehead here, the scar. I don't know if the lights are screwing it up, but you can kind of see where it starts right here, and it goes up and around in my head. If you could, I don't know. Anyway, I had the surgery or whatever, and I was in a coma for a few days, and they didn't expect me to come out of it. But it was a Sunday morning, and I told you guys I came from a very religious household. My great-grandmother, Rosette, was living in a trailer house behind our house, my granny's house. It was my granny's mother. She was living in a trailer house, and she went to a Church of God. I don't know if you guys are familiar with denominations of Christianity, but Church of God is what we call a shouting church. That's the kind of church that people go in and they start hollering, they get the Spirit, and they let the Holy Ghost speak through them by speaking in tongues and stuff like that. And my great-grandmother went to that sort of church. And it's the kind of thing that's scary as shit. If you don't know anything about it, it's terrifying. But that day, she stood in prayer for me. And standing in prayer for somebody, if you don't know what that term means, that means that the church opens up the altar for prayer. And if someone has a issue that is like they need serious prayer for, then someone will stand in prayer for someone else. So my grandmother stood in prayer for me. So she was acting as pretty much representing me on the altar. And the church came and laid hands. So the people who would be closest to my grandmother would lay hands on her shoulders. And then the rest of the church would come up behind and lay hands on the people. It was like, it's a very, it sounds culty. But I'm gonna be honest, growing up in Christianity and that sort of thing, it's kind of a beautiful thing that they do. And long story short, Miss Geraldine Strickland, who was a lady that lived in a house across the street from my grandparents, she went to church with my grandmother, and Miss Geraldine had a vision that I woke up and that I was running down the halls of the hospital. And I'm not here to tell you guys how to feel about religion or any of that stuff, because anybody who knows me now, you know how I feel about that sort of thing. But I'm here to tell y'all that as that was happening, this would have probably been around 12:30 or 1 o'clock. And, or maybe even before then, but as that was happening, this was before cell phones. It's before that kind of communication was possible. I woke up before the race was on. And this is Sunday from the South. My dad watches the race. I woke up and I saw on the TV, I saw that the race was coming on. And I remember I said, are we going to watch the race? And I just remember my dad being in the room. And I just remember my dad being there. I don't remember how he reacted, or I'm sure that he was probably like, yeah, of course we're going to watch the race, buddy. I'm an 8-year-old kid. And anyway, I just remember that happening when I woke up, and the doctors came in and they were like, well, can you walk? And I was like, yeah, I can walk. And I got up and I showed them that I could walk. And in showing them that I could walk, I started running because I was like, I'm strong. I can do this. What do you mean? Of course I can walk. Look, I can also run. And I started running down the hall of the hospital. Guys, I literally, that very morning, I did the thing that Miss Geraldine saw me doing in her vision. And I'm not here to tell you guys that you should believe in any of this stuff. I'm just literally telling you what happened. And if this is like a legend, or if this was, I'm not aware of that. All I know is the stories that I've been told my entire life. And that is a story that my entire family could vouch for. But that head injury resulted in a pretty large, we had to sue my Aunt Marie's insurance company for the medical bills. And after the medical bills were paid, I had about, $70-something thousand left out of the insurance policy that my dad was the overseer of. and he grew the $75,000 from when I was 8 years old into about $96,000 by the time I was 18. So in a decade, he had grown it about 20 grand. And the reason I bring that into things is, one, to explain, yes, you boys had a massive head injury. I don't know if you guys are familiar with, I'm actually gonna sidebar a little bit, and this is, I'm not gonna apologize for being myself again, but sidebar, I've told these stories a lot in podcasts before, so a lot of you guys may have heard all of these things I'm gonna say in this, but I really do have I think I have a more modern idea of why I was the way that I was, and just like having lived a little bit more life since I've told these stories, I think I'll be a little bit more introspective about how these things have affected me and use them to shed a little bit more light on why I've become the way I have. And I'm not going to be sitting out here telling stories to make excuses for why I'm a certain thing, or why I'm not going to make excuses for negativity or the negative parts of me, but I digress. Anyway, so after the accident happened and my mom realizes, and this is, I wonder how I should go about this. My mom became a part of my life after that. A lot of people can chalk it up to, oh, well, your son almost died. You got another opportunity. You almost lost your kid, so now you have another opportunity to become a mother. You can redeem yourself. And I believe that's what I thought, and I was obsessed with that at 8 years old. And then my mom started putting the idea in my ear, oh, we'd love to have you here. You could just move in with us. You could leave your granny's house and you could come live with us. And I just remember lashing out, just being a terrible kid and just absolutely lashing out at people. And just deciding that I wanted to go live with my mom. I wanted something different. I wanted a change. I hated everybody that was around me up there because of all these little things that my mom was spinning in my ear. And when I was 10 years old, I went and moved in with my mom. And I had gotten all A's and then was on the AB honor roll pretty much every year that I was going to school in Bennettsville with my Aunt Marie there, helping me with my homework every day, making sure that I got everything done, staying on top of me like a parent is supposed to. And then I moved to Latta, where my mom and stepdad lived, and in Latta, going to school there, I was just kind of they didn't really value school and shit like that like everybody else does. Like my older brother, who's a very smart man, and has lived life, he's lived a good life, and he's doing very good. My stepbrother dropped out. My stepdad's son. My stepbrother dropped out of high school. My cousin, my older cousin that I looked up to on my stepdad's side, dropped out of school. All of them, pretty much, I don't think any of them very few of them had a high school diploma. It was like people who were my age, people who were pretty much my age were like the first people in their family to have a high school diploma. You know what I mean? Like none of them went to college. Not that that's how you measure intelligence. I'm just giving you guys a little backstory. And by the way, like to emphasize on not how you measure intelligence, all of these people that I'm talking about who didn't finish high school are some of the smartest people that I know when it comes to like automobiles and things like that. Like the kind of people who could diagnose your car's problems over the phone. And I know that's not an important thing for a lot of people, but I'm the kind of person that takes pride in knowing how to do manual things and not just the sort of things that they want to teach you in college. Like, I mean, like life lessons, like lessons you can only learn by living life. I find that I really I think those are good things that people should not shun. And I think that people should not think that these sorts of things are beneath them. I think everyone should maybe not be so harsh on the folks that do those sorts of jobs that they might deem as beneath them. But just because it's beneath you doesn't mean that somebody else is not an absolute genius when it comes to that thing. I just wanted to clear that up because I know a lot of my family watches this, and I don't want them to be like, "Oh, you think we're stupid?" And that's never the case. Because I've gotten I didn't go to college. I barely got out of high school, if I'm being honest. Like I that's where the next part of this story is going to. But like I don't measure intelligence in that way. I was just bad at school, and plus, whenever I got in that accident, that was mid-school year because I was selling World's Finest Chocolates for school, and honestly, this was beginning of school year, and this was the beginning of third grade. So when I left school, this was in October or late September, early October. My birthday is the 14th, and I just remember there being a happy birthday banner hung up in my house, and it was like a big party for me when I came home from the hospital. And yeah, whenever the accident happened, we were doing like rudimentary math, like basically like third grade math. And when I got back to school after all the time I had missed, and I had a tutor that would come by the house and was tutoring me, and she was very, 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 very sweet. And she was just an older lady that worked at the school that I remember would come by the house and like work with me for about 2 hours and like have me do some schoolwork, I think, to keep my brain fresh. But she wasn't keeping up with like the curriculum as it was moving along with the rest of my class. So when I got back to school, they were doing like long division, and like they had moved well past multiplication, like memorizing multiplication tables. I still don't know them. I still don't know them to this day. I just don't know them. And I just missed a specific part of school. I missed a really important part of that learning. What's the word I need to use there? I really just missed that portion of learning in my life, like learning along with the rest of my peers. But one thing that happened when I was spending a lot of time at home was I started picking up instruments. I started getting bored with everything else going on. I couldn't really go outside and play because they were like, don't you, because I couldn't bump my head. And it was terrible because I was a big kid. Like, I was a really big kid, dude. I mean, I could have been a football I could have been a football star. As big of a kid as I was, like, I could have literally been, and just because, not to pin any roses on myself, but the sort of things, if I want to get good at something, I get great at it. Like, I don't, if I want to get good at something, I get very good at it pretty easily. I would have been great at football had I gotten to play when I was growing up, but I'm glad that I didn't because of how my life ended up. But started touching instruments every day. I would just play. I would just pretend I was playing, you know, like just picking up the guitars and stuff. And then my granddad noticing that, hey, he might be onto something here. And I just remember going over to the piano and sitting there and just tapping on it. And my granddad, like, taking the time with me, being like, hey, try this. And my Aunt Barbara, we had family from Alabama. My granddad's from Alabama. That's where I get all the Alabama stuff from. That's everybody you see the hat over here. My granddad was born and raised in St. Clair County, Alabama, and my dad and my uncle were both born there. And when my uncle was a baby, they moved from Alabama to South Carolina, where my grandmother's family lived. But my family in Alabama were a very close-knit people, so they were always coming to South Carolina to see my to visit with everybody. And that was a thing that happened several times a year. And it was a big family in Alabama, so it was always like, it was a big deal that they would all come to see my granddad. Everybody loved Uncle Gordon. Everybody wanted to come see Uncle Gordon. My Uncle Clayton, Clayton Hudgens, my granddad's brother, they would come all the time, but they had a camper. I remember they had a camper that they would drive, and they would sleep in it. I remember they would sleep in the camper. And I always thought that was the craziest thing. Why don't you guys want to sleep in the house? We got this, and I remember we would use the pull-out couch. And as a kid, I remember thinking, man, that pull-out couch was the coolest thing ever. I would take it up and pull the couch out and, like, watch movies in the living room, just pull it out of the couch. And as a kid, it don't matter what kind of thing you're sleeping on, it's going to be awesome. But as a grown person, I know now why nobody wanted to sleep on a pull-out couch. But they would always come and sleep in their camper outside. That was just something that I thought was funny. But one year, while I was getting interested in music, Barbara, who was my cousin, but I always called them Aunt Barbara, Uncle Donald, just because they were that age, and that just made more sense to me. I called everybody Uncle this, Aunt that, even though they were technically my cousins. But Barbara showed me Mary Had a Little Lamb on the piano, and I remember just remembering how to play that, and she showed it to me one time, and then I just remember just knowing it. And after that, they were like, oh, wow, you learned that pretty quick. Let's see if we can show you something else. And then my granddad was showing me the Lean On Me thing, where it was just a da-na-na-na-na-na-na. And it was very easy, one shape. And I remember just excelling really quick at it. And then eventually, I started picking up other instruments and playing other things. My granddad was always there in the background. Like, he would kind of tell me he would sort of give me props when I was doing something correctly. But he would also be I just remember he was a hard man, and I don't blame him for this, and I don't I don't feel any weird way about it, but he would always be very, very much ready to say when I was doing something wrong, more so than when I had done something right. So and I get it now, that he was teaching me what not to do, as if to say, don't do this, instead of telling me what to do, which in my mind, I accept that as meaning like everything else is on the table. Everything else is safe. So you can do anything else musically that you want to do. Just don't do these things. And he was pretty much like more so trying to teach me about like, I think he was teaching me how to learn, because he was not very hands-on with like, hey, do this. No, move this finger. He didn't do that. He wasn't that kind of guy. He showed me these 3 chords and on the guitar, and then he sent me away, and he was like, when you learn them 3, you come back and I'll teach you 3 more. And he just sent me away with a guitar. I learned those 3 chords, and I never had to go back to him. The only other times I went back to him was when I was showing him other stuff that I had learned. And that was when he really started to get, this is going to be this kid's thing. This is what he's going to do. This is the thing that he's supposed to do. And I remember whenever that happened was when he would say, all right, come over here, get your guitar, come over here and play with me. And he would just start playing on the piano, and he would call out the chords that he was playing, and he would call them out to me, and I would learn how to like play. And in time, he used to get angry when I would like, you gotta learn how to keep time. If you can't keep time, don't nobody want to play with you. You got to learn how to keep time. So you've got to have that. You've got to have that thing going. That was one thing that you got to have this going in your head all the time, no matter what you're doing, no matter what you're talking about, no matter what you're playing, no matter what your fingers are doing. You got to have this thing going all the time in your head. That doesn't stop. You've got to keep it going. And if it cuts off, you have to be able to bring it right back up. You got to keep it going like if it didn't ever stopped. You have to do that. He was I just remember him snapping and just keep up. Do this. Make sure to do this the right way. I know I'm rambling a lot, but this is what I am. I'm not apologizing for myself. Sorry. Yeah. I just remember that very vividly, just sitting at the piano. I remember the smell of the keys. I remember like the rolling up of the cover that would cover the keys. You guys know pianos have these things. This had a double hinge. Some of the pianos have one you just raise it up and the whole thing moves up, but this one would fold up and then it would roll up. So this piano was from like the 1890s, and it's still sitting at my my grandparents' house. My dad and my stepmom live there now, but it's still there. And it's going to be mine one day. But technically it's already mine. It's just sitting there. But I remember when he would just sit down at the piano and he would start playing, and then it was just kind of a thing where I would grab my guitar and I would start to come over, and I would just sit behind him while he was playing, and I would start to play lead a little bit. I was starting to kind of figure out how to play lead a little. And man, he loved that. He loved to sit there and just play the piano, and I would just go behind him and do like little lead licks or stuff like that. And he loved doing that. And anytime I would sing a song, he would sing harmony to it, and then he would sing a song, and he would be like, okay, now when I do this, you sing up here. And I don't know why he would just say, you sing up here. He wouldn't say, hey, you need to like be with my voice up here, raise when I raise. He didn't explain things technically like that. He was just like, you sing up here and I'll sing down here. And that just made sense somehow. And I maybe it's just I inherited his ear and he was trying to see how much of it I had. But inheriting his ear, I could hear what I needed to do, and I just did that. But I'm getting lost in this part of the story just because it's so important to who I became as a musician. And I've played with different bands and I've played with several different people, and I've kind of done a similar thing to what my granddad did to me, where I was like kind of aggressively adamant about things that they were doing that were incorrect, rather than, okay, you did this really, really well, and we could really work on this thing over there. But I wasn't like that. I was hard-nosed like my granddad. I was like, don't do that. Like, don't do that. You don't do that. And I've probably not a great bandmate, I think, because of that, maybe. And that's kind of why I'm not in a rush to start a band out here, because I'm a hard person to be in a band with, and I acknowledge that. But anyway, I've digressed vastly in that story. So where I was initially when I went off on that tangent was spending a lot of time at home, getting interested in music because I was being tutored at the house by a tutor who was very, very sweet, but didn't keep me up with the curriculum at school. So I ended up being very behind everybody else in my class when it came to math and the like. So I went from getting all A's to AB honor roll in 4th grade and 5th grade. And in 4th grade, I was such a bad kid. In 4th grade, I got letters sent home every single day. And every single day I got a letter sent home, I got my ass beat. And when I'm saying like I got my ass beat, I mean the belt came off and I got my ass cut. And depending on who was home when I got home and the letters was there, like if I had a note sent home from school, fucking Miss Odom. There were teachers that I loved that were great, that I don't remember their names, but Miss Odom was a piece of shit, and I hated her so much. But she would send a note home every single day, and if I got home and Marie saw the note, she would spank me, and then whenever my granny would see it, she would get me. And then when my dad came over, that was like the big boss. My dad would cut my ass, dude. He would whoop my ass with a belt. And I say this, and people are probably going to think things like, oh my God, that's terrible. That's abuse. And maybe. But I'm going to be honest. I was a terrible kid. I'm not trying to sit here and say that people should go and hit their kids. But what I am saying is that I was a bad kid, and I don't think that I would have been a better person if that didn't happen to me. I think I am a better person because that happened to me. And I know that this is like a Southern thing that we'll all say is like, man, I earned every ass whooping I ever got, and I'm glad that I got those ass whoopings because it molded me into a better person. And I mean, that's how my dad, my uncle were raised. That's how I was raised. But that was a thing. Like, physical beatings were a huge part of my upbringing. Like, that's just, you grow up with Depression era grandparents. My granddad never touched me once. My granddad would pop me. He would pop me. But he would never whip me. My grandmother used to send me out in the yard to pick my own switch. And that was a thing that huge back in the old South. Like, you go out and you pick your own switch and you bring that back, and that's what I'm gonna whip you with. And man, I got my ass cut, dude. My grandma had a deep freezer, and we had a weeping willow tree in the backyard next to my grandma's trailer house. And I used to go out there, and I remember, like, she'd go pick you a switch from that weeping willow tree. And I'd go out there, and I don't know if you guys know about a weeping willow tree, but they're like very, very thin, long, drooping, like drapes of limbs, very thin limbs. And I just remember thinking, well, this can't hurt that bad. Look how little it is. Man, I remember she was keeping some of them in the deep freezer. Like, put that one in the freezer, and then go get the one out of there. So, like, I had one in the deep freezer, and then so, like, every time I went and picked a switch, I would have to put that one in the freezer and bring the one in the freezer out, so it was frozen. And man, I'm here to tell you, dude, I had streaks up the back of my legs, all over my back. Like, I got whipped. And I mean, I was mean. I was hateful. I had demons in me or something. I don't know. But that was pretty much like how I was raised. But my mom, when I went to live with my mom, the being a bad kid kind of continued. And I'm not going to blame this all on the fact that I had a giant concussion when I was 8 years old, but here I am kind of blaming all of me being a bad kid on the fact that I had a giant concussion when I was 8 years old. And then there were just that other shit that we're not talking about that also happened. And just like, that wasn't the ideal situation in the first decade of your life, you know. But I ended up living with my mom. Bad kid life continued, and I would get pink slips sent home all the time, get sent to the principal's office all the time, and in same fashion, every time I would come home with a pink slip, I was going to get my ass cut. Now, my mom, when she whipped my ass, she would beat me with pretty much a metal yardstick, like a metal ruler. And that went on for far too long. And I even remember being a kid and my parents signing the forms to be paddled at school. I know this is an insane thing for somebody who was born in the 1980s, but I was beat at school. I used to, like, literally at my principal and my vice principal at Latta, Miss Leggett, that bitch. She had a wooden box of paddles that were made by students in wood shop over the years that she would pick out, and she would go through and say, what if we used, and this is right out of a movie, and I know it sounds like it, but this is actually what happened. She would like show me all of the different paddles, and then I just remember that, like, she was just like paddling me, and I was in like the 6th grade. This was in the 6th grade, and I was getting paddled at school. And it was the sort of thing where they were like, people knew that I was getting paddled at school, and I got to be, I got made fun of a lot because I was getting paddled at school. And then my mom started getting like way too involved with me at school. And there's this thing where if a kid's bad, like too bad, and I was too bad. I was a really, really bad kid. I I was just really shitty. I had a dirty mouth. I was cussing. Like, I had a really, really dirty mouth even then. And spent a lot of time in the principal's office, was always talking shit, was always trying to get the laugh. I was class clown every single year. No one could outdo me, and if anybody ever tried, I just went harder. I would always win that. But all of that resulted in my mom inevitably shadowing me at school. So I don't know if you guys know what that means. That means my mom would come in class and sit behind me. And there were times when I would try to like make a little joke or cut up in class and I'd get a laugh from my classmates, and my mom would like slap me in the mouth in front of everybody in my class. Like, she literally was sitting behind me in a desk behind me. And I remember just saying something out loud one day and all of my, like, everybody in the class laughing. And I just remember my mom reaching from behind me and slapping me in the face. And I just had to sit there and eat it, man, because I was like, man, I'm not going to cry. So I just had to sit there and just eat it. But it also got to the point to where my mom would, this is in 6th grade, my mom would be asked, like, raising her hand to ask questions to the teacher, because she was like, this is fun for me too. I didn't know that. And then everybody started picking on me because they're like, yo, your mom's asking questions in a 6th grade class. Like, dude, like, this is just, what is happening here? But that became like a pretty traumatic thing. And I was just like very skittish with people, and I pretty much developed this tendency to believe that I was always being fucked with. Like, I remember one time that I just remember one time everybody was like there were some kids at school that were like trying to get me to come and hang out with them, and I was just really excited because I was like, why would these people ever want to hang out with me? And it all ended up being like a really long prank of pretty much like I was the butt of a huge joke for a lot of people because of this situation with my mom coming to school. And like, then there ended up being issues with my mom being at school, and people were like telling, like, I don't know, it was a thing around school where my mom couldn't come back because she made shit really weird with some teachers. And I'm going to be honest, I don't even remember what they were. I just remember she couldn't come back anymore. And I just got to the point where I didn't give a shit. And then I failed the 6th grade. So I had to repeat the 6th grade, and all my friends who were like, all my friends, quote unquote, all the people who I had been in school with moved up to 7th grade, and I was still in 6th grade. And then like they're all like from a different hallway, like laughing at me and shit. And like that made me feel kind of shitty. But I remember failing the 6th grade again. I was just so bad. I never did any homework. I was just like really getting into guitar at this point. I was starting to get a lot better at it. And whenever I was in 7th grade, by the way, in the 6th grade, I took my standardized tests, and I was testing at an 8th grade level in 6th grade. the first time, and they held me back. And then the next time I also tested at an 8th grade level. And because my test scores were too high, they couldn't hold me back. So they passed me to 7th grade, even though I had failing grades because I wasn't doing homework. But my test scores showed that I was retaining the knowledge or whatever. And then when I got to 7th grade, I also failed the 7th grade because, you guessed it, 0 homework. I'm not doing homework. I'll do what I can get done in study hall, but whatever I can't get done in study hall isn't getting done. So anyway, I failed the 7th grade and did summer school in 7th grade so that I could pass and go to the 8th grade. But then I ended up spending a good bit of time back home with my dad's side of the family at my grandmother's house. And they had just opened up in my hometown this Christian school. And because I failed the 6th grade and got held back, I was just the right age to be able to enroll in this Christian school because it was the oldest age group that was able to be enrolled at the school was a year younger than me, which because I failed the 6th grade, I was able to enroll with that class. And I decided I was going to do that. My mom lost her shit. She got so pissed off, and I just remember I remember thinking why she was so upset about that. When, like, just a few years ago, like, she was not picking me up when it was her weekend to do so. And after a while, I went to Christian school for a year, and from the ages of 10 to 18, 19, for about that 9 years, I was kind of back and forth. Like, sometimes I would go to school at the Christian school, but I would live with my mom and sleep there. And I would drive back and forth all the time because I was working a job. When I got a little older, I started working for my stepdad's car dealership. I did a little job doing fence work. The truck I drive right now, actually, here in Austin, Texas, is a truck that I worked out of when I was 15 years old. I did put up fence posts, a chain link fence, and awnings and things of the sort out of the back of that truck. I just remember doing that, working out of that truck as a kid with my preacher, David Reed. Rest in peace to the great David Reed. He was a preacher of the church, and my grandmother was treasury at. And just he was an incredible influence on me growing up. And I just remember him being one of those voices in my head, being my conscience for a while. Because he just had this really calm demeanor, and he always had a really nice way of explaining things with stories, and that's a thing that is very prevalent in the South. My dad does that. My granddad did that. I do that, but I just remember really like saying, "Oh, he's one of us." This David guy. He reminds me of somebody who I can trust and learn from. But I did that job for a few weeks and just realized I wasn't ready for it. I worked at McDonald's for a minute. Not for me. And I worked maintenance at the electric company back home. So basically, I'm like walking around sweeping up shit, changing light bulbs when it needs to happen, doing little things like that. But my first real job that I stuck with and did for a while was with my stepdad. When me and my stepbrother would detail cars, and then we would go drop them off at the auction. We didn't have a car hauler or nothing like that because we couldn't afford that sort of thing. But we would, by that time, I was 15. I had my driver's license. And my brother was like a few years older than me, and all of his friends had their license as well. So my stepdad would give us all like $20 a trip, and like say they would buy 12 cars. So what we would do, we had a used car wholesale dealership. Wholesale means that we don't sell to individuals. Like a normal person couldn't just walk up and buy this car. Like we would only sell to dealers, to other people who would sell to individuals and such. So we don't have to chase down payments. You know, they just pay like, this is how much we want for the car. This is how much. Like right now, we don't have to chase down payments or nothing like that. Just one and done. Buy the whole thing, take it. But anyway, that was pretty much our job where we would do that. And I learned how to drive. I got in a lot of bad car accidents in the early years that I was driving. But I learned a lot of defensive driving going back on the interstate, because this is on Interstate 95. We live right off of 95. And that was how we would get back and forth to Florence, where we dropped off most of the cars, or Darlington, where the racetrack is. Like literally next to the racetrack, there's this really big auction where you've got like 20 bays, like 20 different bays where there's just 20 lanes of cars being auctioned off. And I spent a lot of time at auctions growing up with them, and my granddad having a used car lot as well. So I spent a lot of time going to auctions. In fact, in some of those early days, whenever I would spend the weekend with my mom, they got to where they had figured out that I was not going to want to go home with them, because if I got to the auction and I saw my granddad, I was going to want to go home with him. No doubt. So whenever I got to the sale, I would, that's what we call it, the S-A-L-E, the sale. Whenever we got to the sale, I'd see my granddad and I'd want to go home with him. And that was pretty much a thing. They started bringing my clothes with me whenever we go to the auction, because they would be like, "Here, take your suitcase." They figured it out. But anyway, I digress once again. That I learned a lot about driving, going back and forth and doing that sort of thing, and we would make a car brand new. I learned how to take seats out of a vehicle and remove the carpet, like remove the console and all of the plastic, and then pull the carpet out and like spray the carpet down and hose it off with a pressure washer. We had a little pressure washer, gas-powered thing, and we'd clean carpets out with that. We would just buy absolutely ragged out vehicles and make them look pretty much brand new. And we just did a very good job of cleaning them up. And that was something that was one of the first jobs that I was like proud of. And anyway, I started kind of making a little money, figuring out, oh shit, so I can like work and make money, and this is a cool thing. And I started saving up my money, and I started buying nicer guitars and nicer amps and just a lot of these like cool things that I wanted, because I had money to spend on stuff like that. I wasn't paying no rent or nothing. You know, I was making $300 a week, which is crazy, because that's not much less than I'm making right now, and that's a shocking fact to me that I'm making not much more today than I was making when I was 15 years old working with my stepdad. Anyway, I remember when I decided that I was going to move back with my dad and my I just remember my mom just being like overbearingly wanting me to live with them. And for the reason I know now, when I started to get closer to 18, by this time I'd already started drinking pretty heavily too. Like I was drinking, I'd get my like people would just buy me liquor. I had people that would just buy me liquor. I would just tell them what I wanted, and they would go buy me all the booze I wanted, all the liquor I wanted. As long as I'd pay for it, I'd be here's the money. Take this money. Go get me Go get me this, and you keep the change. But that was after I got the insurance money from the accident. So this is where the story gets tremendously interesting. So, like I said, my dad had grown that money that I had gotten out of the insurance settlement from about 75 grand to about 96. And I got a check for, I'm pretty sure it was like $96,400 and something dollars. I still have a copy of it somewhere in all this shit that I've got. But just imagine that, dude. $96,000 check with my name on it when I'm 18 years old. And it's just, here you go. Here's your check. Here's your money. And my mom went with me to the bank to get that check and close that account. And the guy who was there, the banker, looking at my mom, looking at me and me being like, hey, I'd just like to close my account. And the guy brought me into the office, me and my mom both, and was like, I just want you to know this is a large amount of money. This is the kind of money that if you spend this the right way and invest this in the right things, this is the sort of money that you really wouldn't have to work anymore in your life. Like, you could, for $96,000 invested in the right things, in this would have been in what year would that have been? 1990. No, not 96. This would have been 2004. I think in 2004. Just that $96,000 in 2004, it would have. He was trying to explain to me, hey, you can really live a long time off of this money. But my mom had put the thought in my head that my stepdad would make me more money than anybody else could if I just gave the money to him, so that he could buy used cars, a nicer quality used car, and so he could buy nicer cars, and then we could make more money. So I wrote my stepdad a flat out check for $50,000. And I said, okay, here, I'm investing in this business. Here's $50,000. And this is from an 18-year-old kid. 18-year-old kid writes a check for $50,000. And once that check gets written, I literally gave them more than I kept for myself. Like $50,000 to them, and then I kept $46,000 for myself. And I mean to tell you that I bet, like, I'm just hearing myself say it right now, thinking how furious my dad must have been. And I'll never really forgive myself for putting that man through that. And I'm sure he's long since forgiven me for it. And I'm going to do everything I can to make it up to him, you know, and make sure that I get him back for that, you know. But gave them that, and I realized a few years after that, when I went to say, the deal was that every car that they bought, I would get $100 off of the profit. So I gave them $50,000 when they had nothing. Like, they were literally having nothing. They were about to, like, and they put the guilt on me, like, oh, we're not going to be able to keep this thing open. We're going to be broke. We don't have enough money to keep this thing going. We're going to have to, I don't know, we might lose the house. We might, and this is an 18-year-old kid they're saying this stuff to. And it's like, they're putting all this stuff on me like a responsibility. Oh, we're going to lose. I don't know what we're going to do. This is and me wanting to help, being a nice guy, I'm like, okay, I'm going to give you this money. So every car that comes in, they made the deal. We give you $100 on every car that comes in. So sometimes, man, we buy 12 cars. Like I said, we get 12 cars. That's $1,200 in a week. And they're just giving me $1,200. And I'm like, this is awesome. This is great. This is easy money right here. So then I start to notice, I start to do the math, because I'm 18 years old. I'm starting to think, oh, I want to get involved in business. I want to know exactly what goes on. I start taking notes. I had a computer. I started like putting shit in the notes in a computer or whatever, and I'm starting to keep up with the books a little bit. So I start noticing, okay, well, my envelope on the counter this week had $700 in it, but I saw 13 cars come through the yard. So where's the rest of the money that you guys owe me? And then my mom started saying, oh, we used somebody else's money for that. So I'm starting to ask questions. I'm like, all right, well, so if y'all are using somebody else's money, then y'all don't need my money anymore. So now how about y'all have gotten all the good out of my money. Give me my money back now. So if y'all don't need my money anymore, you've already got somebody else's, then give me mine back. And then shit got real weird, because they were having to tell me that, oh, they didn't, it don't work like that. And I'm like, bullshit, it don't work like that. I gave you a check for $50,000. And now you're telling me that you're using someone else's money to buy these cars with? So give me my fucking money back. And it was a problem. They obviously didn't have the money. They had obviously blown through it. And my dumb ass, I didn't realize, because I'm sitting here thinking, oh, I got all this money. I'm blinded by these envelopes with like $1,200 to $1,500 in them a week sitting on the counter. And I'm realizing that, man, they were literally just giving me my own money back to me this entire time in little small increments. Me thinking that this was like profit on my investment, when they're just slowly trickling my money back to me. And they maybe gave me back, I don't know, 10 grand or so, something like that. They probably gave me back 10, 15 grand over the course of me realizing what was going on. And then I was like, yo, this is not cool. This is fucked up. And I got to where I didn't really want to interact or talk to my mom or anything like that anymore. And I was like, this is bullshit. Y'all are not doing right by me, and this isn't fair to me. So, I got real ill with them about that, and I stopped talking to them. Stopped talking to her, and that was that. Didn't want anything else to do with her anymore. But then I started like talking to my dad's side of the family, and to their credit, by the way, I'm going to smoke. I've been looking at this thing thinking, oh, should I or should I not? I smoke in real life, so I'm going to do that here, because I kind of need it. By the way, I'm sorry that this is becoming kind of a doozy or maybe a downer, and I hope that some of you guys haven't cut this thing off yet, but if you have, I guess I kind of get it. And if you haven't, thank you so much for being here. So started to my dad's side of the family's enormous credit. They never spoke bad about my mom. And they would even take up for my mom when I would speak bad about her. They would always give me that, hey, no matter what, she's your mama. You only get one. She's your mama. And that's all there is to it. So they would take up for her when I would speak bad about her. And like they did that for years until the money thing happened. When the money thing happened, I feel like all gloves were off, all bets were off. at that point, and they were pretty much just like, yeah, look, she's always been like that. She literally kind of like not my granddad kind of got swindled out of a lot of the money that he had there at the end of his life. This piece of shit mechanic that was doing a lot of work with my granddad when his mind started slipping at the end. He swindled a lot of fucking money out of my granddad. But my granddad was pretty well off whenever I was growing up. And I remember that being like a thing. Like that being a thing around the campfire when I was growing up. Like I remember people would say things like, oh, you ain't ever going to have to want for nothing in your life, man. Your granddaddy's one of the richest men around here. And I just remember people saying shit like that when I was a kid. And it got to the point to where they were pretty much like, hey, your mom, I'm sure she tried to like get involved with your dad because of the rumors of around town or whatever, wanting to get involved with like a rich family or something like that, like old money or something. And it was at this point whenever my Aunt Marie started speaking up. Now my Aunt Marie was, like I said, she was like my big sister. Marie was literally, that was what she was. She was like a big sister to me. And she was the one that started speaking up first. Like, your mama ain't no count. She ain't never been no count. She ain't never been worth anything. The only reason, and my Aunt Marie was the one that brought this up. And she was like, she didn't have nothing to do with you when you were little. She'd always leave you sitting here waiting on her to come pick you up, and she'd never show up. And she's always been like that. And the only time she started acting like she cared was when that money came around. And then when she got that money, she didn't need you no more. And that's the honest to God truth. That's exactly how that went down. And when the money was in their pocket, they didn't care anymore. My mom got a boob job. Her and my stepdad both had like matching motorcycles. Like, they spent that money so fast. And then just in a matter of a few weeks, they ended up having to go into somebody else where they would do this thing. And I realized, oh, she said they're using somebody else's money. This is a con that my mom runs. And it was literally just a long con of her getting that money from me. And I realized that she didn't give a shit about me. And looking back at all the other stuff that I had kind of turned a blind eye to because I was obsessed with the idea of having a mom, started to come to light in a big way, in a big dark way. And I started putting a lot of different pieces together and really seeing who my mom was as a person. And then I started to see other relationships that she had had with other people as what they were. And I'm realizing, oh shit, my mom has been like fucking these dudes and getting and like conning them into giving her money, blackmailing them into giving them money to do business with them and like buy cars or whatever with their money. That was like the hustle, I think, is that my mom would figure out a way to con money out of people. And then she would get it to my stepdad, who would buy cars with it. And it was like kind of washing money in a way. And I started to see her for who she actually was. And I told her that several times in person. I told her that on the phone a lot. And it was a very rocky relationship for a while. Then my stepbrother and his wife got pregnant. And anytime a grandchild comes into the picture, that usually really changes a grandparent. I don't know if any of you have ever witnessed people get a grandbaby, the first grandbaby. I mean, it absolutely changes people. They get obsessed with this grandchild, and it literally changes a person. Whenever my brother and his wife had my nephew, he adored my mom. My mom was his favorite person on the face of the planet. Like, he just loved her. And she literally started to be a great-grandmother. Not a great-grandmother, but she started to be a great person in his life. And I was like, you know what? If this is you being karma, setting things right for the things you missed on me, then roll tide. I will happily in my mind forgive you for all the wrongs that you wronged me, because she's really getting it right for my nephew. And that was the way that I looked at it, and I was very comfortable with that, letting all of that go and being happy that she was doing good by my nephew, doing right by him. But then my stepdad ended up getting sick. And I started to hear stories from my sister-in-law and my brother about my mom getting involved with different people, like the people who work. I heard that my mom had some kind of like online Facebook Messenger bullshit redneck relationship with somebody who worked at the pharmacy at Walmart. And I remember thinking, well, that's a crazy thing to say. But while my stepdad was in the hospital, he got diagnosed with prostate cancer or colon cancer, one of the two. It was cancer. He got diagnosed with cancer, and while my stepdad was in the hospital, literally dying, my mom was bringing men back to the house, to the bed that they slept in together, and my cousin and his wife caught them and saw what was going on, because that's the kind of neighborhood where all the family lives next to each other. It's that kind of situation. So they got caught red-handed, and then it got to the point to where my mom threw away everything that she had going for her by being a good grandmother for my nephew. And I realized, oh shit, like people like that just don't change, you know? People just don't change like that. And man, after that, I remember telling her, I never want to see you again. I never want to speak to you again. Don't call me. Don't contact me. If you try to call me and you try to contact me, I promise you, I will hurt myself to the point that you will never be able to talk to me, or no one else will either. So don't ever try to talk to me. Don't ever try to contact me again. And this was probably in, I don't know, 2010, 2011, maybe. Somewhere, maybe 2009 even. But anyway, after that point, we maybe got together a couple times and we tried to really bury the hatchet, but it didn't work. And my stepmom was my stepdad was just, and I'm not saying that he was completely innocent in all of this stuff, but I know how manipulative my mother is, and she can really, my stepdad was just, he loved her. And that was his biggest sin, was loving my mom. And towards the end of his life, he knew that. And we talked about it. And we made our peace before he passed. And I'm glad that we did that. Because I wanted him to know, like, hey, man, like, I know that my mom is an awful person. And I'm sorry that she did what she did to you, but I also had to let him know, like, hey, man, like, just so you know, like, that's how you guys' relationship started. Like, you were the guy cheating with her on my dad. So, like, it's kind of silly to be upset at this point that she did the same thing to you that you guys did to my dad. So, but we had like really grown up conversations there at the end. And I remember I talked to my stepdad. I would stop by and see him, man. Like I saw my stepdad. I've seen my stepdad, and he's been R.I.P. God rest his soul, Robert Moore. I've seen my stepdad more than I've seen my mom in the last however long that's been, like 12, 13 years. I've seen my stepdad more than I've seen my mom, and he's been passed away I think he passed away in about 2012, maybe 11 or 12. But yeah, that's a whole thing that I had to unpack. A lot of the childhood trauma that I had surrounding my mom, I had to unpack a lot of that in a really inconvenient time in my life, when I was like running out of money. I was thinking, oh, I have this insurance of $50,000 just sitting here. So I was kind of like living my life. I was like, okay, so I'm going to invest this $50,000, but then I'm just going to like have silly time with this $46,000 that I had left. So that was when I was giving people, here, keep the change, bring me liquor. Started drinking pretty heavily, got involved in the bottle strongly. I started smoking pot. I started doing all the things that they say, hey, you shouldn't do this stuff. But I started doing all of that stuff. And I had a pool table. I built a pool room and a pool table behind both houses that I lived in, my mom and stepdad's house, and also my grandmother's house. I had the pool table, and behind both houses, which was pretty rad because I was really into shooting pool back in the day. And that gave me a place to hang out. Like, my friends could come and hang out, and like we were all drinking out there underage, and my mom was the kind of, well, we'd rather you do it here at the house. And I will say she was cool with that, with like letting my friends come over and just get shitty ass drunk out there in the pool room, and we just have a big old time shooting pool all night, and just me and a few girls, and Sometimes my brother would pop in, and it was just a big party back in the day. And there's a couple people who are still around that can vouch for this stuff. But yeah, that was the thing, and I just started getting involved in that. And I decided I wanted to drop out of high school. But I pretty much wanted to finish that story of the whole mom situation just because I make a lot, and I have to be adamant about letting you guys know that, like, I say these things a lot, and I speak very negatively about my own mother. And everybody else has such most everybody else has such a wonderful relationship with their mom. When they hear me talk about mine the way that I talk about her, it really changes the way that they look at me. And I don't want that to be the case. I want to give a little backstory. And by the way, I know that I said this in the preamble at the beginning of this video, but like, I'm just telling you all of these stories so that we can just move past all of this stuff. This is just information that I want you guys to know about me so that this podcast going forward will make more sense as to how or why I act the way that I do, or why I am, or why I respond to things the way that I do, or just why I am the way that I am. Long story short. But going back to when I was kind of halfway through, I lived with my mom for a couple of years, and like, I was just not really, I would get beat when I got pink slips sent home, but there was other stuff that I should have been disciplined for that I wasn't, and that was sort of allowed to run wild. But I took some of those tendencies back home with me when I decided to move back. And one of those times when I was moving back and forth, I was staying back home, and this was when I was in 9th grade. I was a freshman in high school this year. Or was it 10th? Yeah, it was 9th grade. Or was it 8th grade? Was it? 8th or 9th grade. I forget. I want to say it was 9th grade. But could have been 8th grade. Anyway, I was going through puberty. I had just had a girlfriend. My first real girlfriend. Her name was Shane. It's ironic. Her name was Shane and my name was Kelsey. So, like, you would think, like, when it'd be like, oh, Shane and Kelsey's here, and everybody would, oh, you Shane? Because I'm the guy. But, anyway, we dated for a while, but I was going to church, and I remembered one day my girlfriend was sitting in my lap at this thing that we were doing that was semi-church related. And I just remember the teachers looking at me. The two teachers who were like kind of splitting duties as youth leaders, looking at me and like shaking their head and like mouthing to me that that's a bad look. Like, it doesn't look good that you're out here representing church, but you're teenagers and she's sitting in your lap. Like, it doesn't look good. And I was like, man, we were really good together, man. It was like we were friends. Like, it was more than just like being in a relationship, but we were like actually friends before that. And it was really cool. And I remember thinking, like, that was the first time, I'm like making out with this girl all the time. And like, I'm really feeling all of these hormones for the first time in my life. And, it was one of the first times that I like felt kind of like, I was always real skittish about stuff like that because of the one thing that we don't talk about. I was very skittish about stuff like that. And, But whenever I was with Shane, I was like this was the first time I feel safe in a relationship like this. And whenever they told me that I didn't need to be focusing on a girlfriend right now, I needed to be focusing on my relationship with God, I really kind of took that shit seriously. And I was very much under the guise that there was a giant angry man in the sky ready to smite me down with every single sin that I committed. So I started thinking, oh, well, I can't do this anymore. Like, with her. And I remember they convinced me on this youth retreat. I remember there was this youth retreat that I went on that my girlfriend didn't go on. I don't know if she wasn't allowed to be there or what. But it almost seemed like during this retreat, they really leaned heavily on, you don't need to focus on having a relationship or a girlfriend or anything like that. You need to worry about your relationship with God first. And just me coming back, being manipulated by this thought and breaking up with my girlfriend immediately when I got home. And I was just like, I remember just coming home and calling her and her going, hey, stranger. I remember I'm standing on the back porch looking out over the railroad tracks way by the shop and breaking up with her. And there just being heat lightning going on in the sky while it was happening. I just remember that being a thing and me just telling her, hey, I'm sorry, but I got to do this. And then right after I broke up with her, my teacher at the time told me, hey, I know a girl that lives in Laurinburg that's in a similar situation to you. She just got broke up with too. Or she just got out of her relationship too. And I'm going to give you her screen name so you can message her on AOL. This was on AOL Instant Messenger, AIM. I remembered talking to her and just not even thinking that, hey, you guys just told me that I shouldn't be focusing on this relationship stuff, yet here you are trying to set me up with somebody, it seems. Totally oblivious to that. Didn't even see it. I was very dumb. But anyway, so I started messaging. Then this is when I was 15. I told you guys I encapsulated. I know I jumped ahead in the storyline a little bit just to finish that whole my mom stuff, but it needed to be said. I'm sorry. So started messaging with this girl, and I remember Shane, my girlfriend, or ex-girlfriend at this time, had started babysitting for my teacher a little bit because we were all very, very close. And I got pretty involved online with this girl. And these conversations that we were having ended up getting a little more risque by the day. And I wasn't quiet about it at school. I was kind of like bragging about this thing that I had, like, oh, I got this new girl, she's cool, and I'm talking to her on that. She lives in Laurinburg, you know, she goes to a different school. but for real, like, she went to a different school, and there was this was a whole thing. And one day Shane was over at our teacher's house babysitting her kids, and she got on the computer and she noticed the screen name that I had been talking about. So we found out that my teacher had been chatting with me under this other girl's name, and I asked her about it, and she was like, no, that's not true, or anything like that. And then, like, but then she was like, well, is there anything else you want to talk about? And then so, like, my teacher started having these conversations with me, and I wasn't talking to the girl anymore. I started messaging her, and there was no response ever. So obviously she deleted the account that was on the thing so that she could, like, I guess, I don't know, cover her ass. But long story short, we started talking, and these talks started to become more and more inappropriate, and it all culminated into us like doing phone sex, and that was a thing that started to happen regularly. I had a phone in my room at that time, and this was before cell phones and shit. So like we were doing this shit on like fucking landlines, bro. But I had a phone in my room where we would start to like talk or whatever, and I'd be like, yeah, everybody's asleep, ain't nobody awake listening to us. And that was the kind of thing that had started to happen. And then one day we got to we were in school, we were in the class, and she had brought me up to her desk in the middle of a class, and like she was like pulling her skirt up, showing me that she wasn't wearing any panties in front of the class. Like, I mean, it was obviously behind her desk, but it was a kind of thing to where she was bringing certain students up, but she started bringing more students up to like put them off the trail. But she started bringing me up, and she would like be grabbing my junk and like getting me hard, and then telling me to go back to my seat and shit. And it was like an embarrassing thing. I just remember doing that. And one day she was just like grabbing me a lot, like grabbing my dick a lot at school that day, just playing around with me. And then she ended up like opening up the door to the teacher's lounge and like flashing me, and then just going into the teacher's lounge. And I remember I followed her in there, and she turned around and freaked out and said, "Get out of here. Like don't come in here. People are going to freak out." And I just remember that being a thing. And then it got to where, hey, we're going to actually do something physical. Like, we're actually going to do something, and not just this like grabbing each other over the clothes or whatever. And we met down a dirt road, and I've talked about this on Kill Tony. She gave me my first ever blowjob, and my first ever sexual experience was a blowjob from her. And I just remembered right after that post-nut clarity, where I just remember thinking, oh my God, this was bad. And I went home, and I've always carried my emotions. I've always carried whatever happened, like how I felt. I've always worn it on my face. So I came home, and I was like, yeah, I'm tired. I don't feel good. I think I'm going to go to bed, which was completely abnormal for me. You guys remember I said earlier, dude, we were like Yahtzee and cards. Like, that was an everyday thing. Like, we all kind of hung out together. But my Aunt Marie noticed that. And to her credit, she didn't say anything. She just started paying attention. And then she started kind of like paying attention and staying up a little later. And one night, me and my teacher were on the phone, and we were kind of like talking about what had happened. And Marie heard that. And I don't think she said anything yet, because my mom kind of noticed a similar thing about my demeanor, and she was just such a badger about things that she would press me and press me and press me, and it really just kind of made me boil over, and I just exploded and just exploded everything. And this all happened right after I had gone to the dentist and had some x-rays done of a cavity that I was going to need filled. And they found a cyst growing inside my sinus cavity. And they had scheduled a surgery to remove the cyst from my sinus cavity that was upcoming. And I know this is a lot, but it's all necessary to understand me. And that's what the point of this episode is. So I was about to have to take off about 2 or 3 more weeks of school to have this procedure done, maybe a couple months. And that was right whenever this story came out. And everybody has just pressed me on it. And then after that had happened, Marie said, yeah, I heard them on the phone, like, this is a thing. We had a meeting with my mom and stepdad and my dad and stepmom and the administrator of the school and the principal of the school. The administrator and my dad were best friends, Pastor Larry. He was a hell of a guy, great guy. He passed away not long ago, but he had a lot. He had a huge influence on me. I can still hear him pray. Like, I remember the last time I heard him pray, it was a blessing over a meal at Ryan's that we went to, a buffet, before we went to a football game, Conway in Marlboro County, high school football. I just remember hearing him pray. It was just a beautiful thing to hear him talk to God. But had a meeting with all of them, and they assured me, okay, so first of all, she's going to lose her job. She's going to be fired. You were about to, next week, you were about to, take off the time for your surgery. And he said, why don't you go ahead and take that time off now, and you just come back after your surgery. And I just remember walking out of the principal's office with all of my parents and Pastor Larry and Coach. Coach was the principal. Everybody, we called him Coach because he was a tennis coach, and he coached a couple of other things over at the Marlboro County High School, but he had retired and he came back to help out the Christian school a little bit. But we walked out of the office, and I just remember looking down the hallway, and I remember seeing her, the teacher. I think that's the last time I ever saw her in person. And I just remember looking down the hallway, seeing her. They were going to lunch. They were going to the lunchroom. And last time I ever saw her, last time I ever spoke to her, communicated with her, pretty sure that was the last time. But anyway, that happened, and I went and I had the surgery. I had the procedure done. I had the cyst taken out, and they had it tested, and it was malignant. It was a malignant growth, and because it was cancerous, I had to go back every 3 months and have a CAT scan for the first 2 years, every 3 months, and then for the next I think 2 years, or the next year, I had to have one every 6 months. And I think they were monitoring it to make sure it wasn't growing back, and I don't think it ever did. So they were like, okay, you don't have to come back anymore. So I didn't. But yeah, in that one fell swoop, by the time I was 19 years old, by the time I moved out of my parents' place at 19 years old and decided to move to Myrtle Beach, I had terrible childhood experience we don't talk about. Massive head injury that resulted in a coma that lasted for multiple days, and flatlined 3 times in the ambulance on the way to the hospital and had to be brought back to life. Was expected to have assistance for the rest of my life and deal with seizures and all sorts of other things. That happened. Became a terrible child that was just completely unruly and unchecked. Because of the accident that I had, everybody gave me a lot more leeway with things that I was getting away with. That developed a lot of lifelong habits that I still have, and where I just feel like, oh, pity me because I've done this, I've lived this thing, and I still have that. And here's an aha moment for me, is like just hearing myself say that. I'm realizing that like I do take my own experience into account more than that of anybody else. And as someone who likes to portray myself as a selfless person, I'm not doing a very good job of that. So anyway, that happened, and then the whole teacher situation. First sexual experience that I had to literally give the play-by-play of to so many grown people that it almost turned me off to any sort of sexual situation. Teacher thing. Then money, getting the money, having my mom swindle the money out from under me, and then losing the money, losing $50,000 pretty much all together. Well, after all they gave back, even if I count the little bits that they gave me along the way, that's still, I've lost $35,000 to $40,000 in one fell swoop. All while finding out that my mom the entire time has been lying to me my entire life to just try to get me close enough to where she can con me out of money, just like she does to the rest of the people in her life. So these are like 6 incredibly traumatic events that happened early on in my life, within the first 2 decades of my life, that has kind of resulted in me putting up a lot of walls. And because I've put up a lot of these walls, I'm not really about letting people in. I'm very, very, and some people might consider this rude, or like, oh man, he's just kind of rude. He's not very warm. He's not very like welcoming. And honestly, I start everybody off at the top. I give everybody the benefit of the doubt. But if I start noticing these little itty bitty tendencies that people have, if I start noticing little things like behavioral traits that I've noticed in manipulative, or like if I noticed in my mother, who is a very manipulative person, who tried to present herself as not that. And if I ever notice any of these traits in people, because I'm going to be straightforward with you, I have all of those powers as well. Everything that my mom had as far as manipulation, like, I am also able to do that. But I've always really tried my damnedest to lean all of that towards, I like to manipulate people into doing good for themselves and doing good for other people. I really like to manipulate people into being better people for themselves. And I know that's a crazy sentence to make, but that's just how I feel. But anyway, all of this happened in the first 2 decades of my life. And all of those things, like I said, have resulted in me putting up all of these walls. And there are very few people who get close. There are very few people who can make it past those walls. And if you are the people who have made it past those walls, you should consider yourself very lucky, because very few people get to get in there. I don't let people in there. I don't let people in here. So just the fact that I'm putting all of this out in like a large lump sum, no pun intended, at this point in my life is kind of ridiculous, because I would usually say, hey, go back. If you guys want to know more about me, go back and listen to some of the old podcasts. But that's not the point of this thing. The point of this thing is to kind of give you guys a little bit of insight on who I am as a person and what really made me this way. And a lot of that stemmed from how my childhood went. So I kind of wanted to go over a lot of that in this episode. And so pretty much from there on out, like, I kind of wrote off the whole mom thing. I'm not going to get that money back. I got to figure something else out. Lived in Myrtle Beach, ended up doing the music thing, and just I worked at Starbucks in Myrtle Beach for a really long time. I worked at a corporate store in North Myrtle Beach for like 3 years or something like that. And then I worked at a franchise store for another 1.5 years or so. I did pest control for a time, for about 1.5 years or 2. I did pest control when I was crawling up under houses, doing termite inspections or bed bug jobs and the like in Myrtle Beach. And one of our clients was a fellow by the name of Adam Justice. And Adam Justice was an incredible guitar player and just pretty much a Myrtle Beach legend. He owned one of the most popular bars in the Myrtle Beach area called the Surf Shack back in the day. And his name was a name that I'd heard going around in the circle for years. Like, we had mutual friends, yada, yada, yada. Adam had a couple of bands that he played with. Adam learned that I played music, and he was like, shit, you should come and play, sit in with one of my bands, So he was playing with a band called Free Beer with a guy named Zach Williams at the time. And I went and I sat in with them at Mellow Mushroom. And they were like, man, I was playing the drums. I was playing the hand drum. The drum I have is right over there, the drum that I played with them. And showed up, played with them. They were like, oh, man, hey, I'm doing this thing with another guy down at another spot called Uncle Tito's. You should come and jam with me there, too. So I went and jammed with Adam and Smitty. And whenever I did that, we ended up, like, it went pretty well. We had a good time. We were like just this party-centric. It was just a good time. We brought the party with us. I see the Nether Hour boys playing now, that Nether Hour trio, and I just remember, I remember thinking, man, that's what we were. We were the party band. We brought the party with us. We were just, everybody wanted to go to our show to just hang and just be around. It was like, it was a thing to do. So that band, we ended up playing together a few more times, and then we landed on a name, Cornbread, and we ended up picking up like not necessarily a residency, but kind of a residency at this place at Broadway at the beach called Wet Willie's. we're obviously playing at Uncle Tito's for a while because Adam's brother was a part owner of Uncle Tito's. He owned half of Uncle Tito's, and with our other boy Jimmy, and out of all the gigs that we had started doing, Adam and Smitty having regular jobs, and then they hired me on to go do some music. I was hosting open mics at Uncle Tito's. I was also hosting open mics all over town, really, with this whatever you call it, this kind of like company or an agency or whatever you want to call it. It was a half-assed kind of thing though. But I did that. I did the open mic thing, the music open mics, for about a year or two, and that was how I got my bar chops up, because I had church chops from playing back home, and then I did a couple like solo acoustic coffee shop gigs here and there, which that was my main thing, was doing a coffee shop tour right after I graduated, and I recorded an album that I was pushing. And yeah, by the way, over this course, I recorded my first album. It was with a Christian band. We called ourselves Forgiven. It was myself, Chris Burks played drums, and Billy Baldwin, Pastor Larry's son. Pastor Larry, I was talking about a minute ago, administrator of our school. His son, Billy, played bass with us, and we were a little trio called Forgiven. We recorded our first album. We were 15. I was 15 years old. Chris was 15. Billy, I think, was 10. I think Billy might have been 10 or 11 when we recorded that album, dude. It was like we were literally kids, man. And Billy was just he excelled fast musically. Like, he had a good brain. I remember I gave him a couple lessons, and I remember after the second lesson, like, he was just he had kind of like gotten past the point where he needed anything else, and I was just like, man, you got it. Just keep doing that. But anyway, we recorded that. I recorded another my next album, which was a solo record, when I was 18 at Bradley House Records in Florence, South Carolina. The great and powerful Fred Shaw. By the way, Jim Owens, great producer, recorded my first album in his backyard, man, it was the first professional studio I'd ever been in, and that studio exists in my mind palace. If you don't know what a mind palace is, Google it. Yeah, so I recorded those albums there, and then 18 years old, I recorded a 5-song EP. My grandmother borrowed the money. We went to the bank, and I borrowed the money, trying to build my credit, to record this album, and finally recorded it and got it out. It was a good record, and it did pretty well locally. So I booked a handful of coffee shop gigs, and I did this little coffee shop tour. Last gig of that tour was in Myrtle Beach at a coffee shop called The Living Room. Miss Kathy, I forget her last name, Miss Kathy booked that room. We got paid $50 a gig, and she was just, if you called and asked for a gig and said, hey, I want to come play there, she'd give you a date, and she'd give you a shot, man. And I just remember going and doing that gig, and I ended up crashing down there with a buddy of mine named Charlie. And they had ended up like being like, wow, I'm playing guitar, pulling the guitar out at the house. And we were staying in this 1-bedroom house in Garden City Beach, South Carolina, which is one of the small beaches next to Myrtle Beach. And we were in Garden City, and it was just a party every single night. It was my buddy Evan's birthday, and Evan was turning 19. And on Evan's 19th birthday, we got a keg. Charlie got us a keg, and we said we're gonna party every single night until we float this keg. And we did. We threw a party every night for like 3 or 4 days. And by that time, I'm pretty much staying at the beach now, and ended up never going back home. I remember telling them, hey, I think I'm going to stay down here. My Aunt Marie saying, oh, you'll be back in a month, knowing how my mind works, that'll make me never want to come back. That'll make me stay out. But anyway, played I played music, but not really professionally at that point yet. I was still just kind of like doing random coffee shop gigs for $50 here and there, and I'm trying to just book myself. But I got to partying a little too much. We started doing psychedelics a good bit, and that kind of got me interested in a different part of my life. I got a job at a golf course. I was waking up super early. I remember I'd get up at like 5:30 in the morning to take a shower, and I'd have to be at work. I remember waking up at 5:30 to take a shower and having to be at work by 6, and that being enough time. Like, I used to be able to just shower that quick. I'm like thinking, how did I do that? But yeah, I did that for a while, and then I quit that job and ended up getting a job at Starbucks. But during all of that time, I'm like hitting up open mics, going out. I'm doing my thing. I'm bringing my guitar to Starbucks. I'm hosting my open mic at Starbucks. I'm getting up there and like showing all my coworkers and everything that I'm actually a musician and stuff like that. So I started to build a little bit of a name for myself in the area, just doing stuff like that. And then fast forward all of that to meeting Adam Justice, and me and Smitty starting Cornbread, Adam and Smitty starting Cornbread, and then getting that little residency over at Wet Willie's at Broadway at the beach, leading us to get prompted by Scott Bird, who was my agent for over a decade. And he was like, hey, I'd like to represent you guys if you guys are cool with that. There's no contract or anything to sign. We never signed a contract. We were just like, hey, you book the gig, we give you 10%, 10% is that was the agreement that we made. And our gigs went from us making $50 a man to us making like $100 a man. And then a couple years later, we got another raise. And the things just kept going up from there, and the band just started to regionally get more popular. But the whole time, we were, like I said, we were the party band, dude. But like, we are the reason. Here's a fun fact for you: my band, Cornbread, was the reason that bands in Myrtle Beach no longer get free bar tabs. Because there were times when our bar tab would exceed what our check was going to be that night. And that is not even a joke. That's like a thing. So our band was the reason that bands don't get free bar tabs no more. But all of this, I was drinking very heavily, and just me drinking, I'm suppressing all of these bad memories that I told you guys about a few minutes ago. Well, an hour or so ago now. But I went and got to drinking real heavy, man. And by this time, when I was living in North Myrtle Beach, I met my longtime girlfriend Erica, and we dated for a long time. And when I was I don't know. I was young. We were both young, man. And, yeah, I was just, I didn't know what I was doing in life. And I don't think either of us did. And we kind of just slowly, over the course of about 4 years, we just slowly grew apart, and she ended up going off to college. She ended up going off to college after she graduated. And And this was hell. I was 20. I just turned 21, I think. I just turned 21 when we started dating, and she was about to graduate high school. And we just kind of like I said, she went off to college, and I stayed home. I moved back in with my roommates that I had lived with for a long time, and it was just like slowly growing apart. And then we keep dating back and forth with her coming back from Charleston. We had a long distance relationship thing going for a while. She was in college, and I would go see her, a couple times a month, or we would figure out a way to see each other. We were like on the phone constantly texting, like keeping an all-day conversation going and just falling asleep together on the phone every night. That was a thing. But we dated, this was about 4 years or whatever, and then I ended up moving into an apartment out of the house that we had stayed in. Me and one of my other roommates, we moved into an apartment, and that apartment became my apartment in Murrells Inlet. That was the backdrop for all of the podcasts that I recorded. Like that house, like I did some really sketchy things to myself, like where I was just had some really dark thoughts in that house that I overcame, and people were witness to those dark thoughts and those dark moments that I lived through. But like there's just some crazy shit that I went through mentally in that house. But I came out of the other side, and like I really consider that house like my incubator for a better version of me. Like a really shitty version of me skidded sloppily into that apartment, but the me that walked out of that door for the last time to move to Austin, Texas, was like that house, that apartment is the place where all that happened. And that apartment lives in my mind palace as well. Like it has a prominent spot in my mind palace. And I still love, I still to this day, I would go back and live in that house for the rest of my life. Like I would go back and grow old in that apartment. Like, I would happily do that. And it was just the prime location. I was like 2 blocks from the water, and just it was incredible. But I moved in there, and I kind of had really grown apart with my girlfriend Erica. So we broke up, and I started talking to this other girl who lived next to those apartments, and we ended up just like doing Percocet 30s and drinking 40-ounce Budweiser diesels and watching Lost and just getting hammered, and taking these pills and watching the show, and just I started like she was just basically living with me at that point. We lived together, and like both of us are completely different people now, by the way. So maybe I should probably cut the names out. But yeah, we ended up having just a really sketchy couple of years, or not even it was probably just a year. But it was a really sketchy relationship that we were in, because she was in a thing with her old boyfriend, and then I just kind of realized that like other people don't value things the way that I do, and like I am a serial what do they call that? Monogamous. But even though I did get hammered as shit on Jaeger one time and have a threesome while I was still in the relationship, which is probably the first time I've said that live. Not live, but you know what I mean. So, I mean, I wasn't great, but I did get hammered as shit on Jaeger and made a big mistake one night. But in my defense, that big mistake had there were 2 girls there. Anyway, I just kind of I got involved in too much crazy stuff, and then in that apartment, like, it was just me there, and then my roommate ended up we had the greatest situation of all time with our green tea guy. And for those who don't know, we call that substance that I enjoy smoking that grows from the earth green tea, so that the other people who listen to these podcasts and determine whether or not there's anything that doesn't need to be talked about to remain monetized. Is AI going to be able to hear what I just said there? Our green tea hookup, and one of our greatest friends, one of our best friends from back then, my roommate at the time ended up picking some green tea up from him and selling it to some undercover officers, who in turn knocked on our apartment door and came in and arrested him just after the entire SWAT team had kicked the door in at my other friend's house, who we got the green tea from. And they knew all of our vehicles. They knew all of our license plates. They wanted to know who drove what vehicle because they had seen all of our cars come and go from over there. But my roommate at the time was the guy who rolled over on him, and it just ended up making it look like I had something to do with that as well. And that burned me up for a real long time. But then I started thinking about it. I was like, man, like, I know the truth, and so it doesn't really matter. But so after that happened, I was like, hey, man, we're not going to be smoking. We're not going to be doing that stuff. They showed up at our house. They know where we live. We're not going to be messing around like that anymore. And then he continued to get involved in stuff that I didn't approve of. So I basically evicted him. And when I kicked him out, he still owed me about $1,000 in rent that I never got. But I'm going to be honest, I owe so much money to so many more people that it's stupid. One day I'll talk about all that. But that is an entire episode to itself. Yeah, that guy, I ended up kicking him out. And we knew each other. I called his family, and I told his family, I was like, hey, guys, I'm just letting y'all know I can't let him live here no more, and I'm sorry, but, like, here's this. I just can't let him live here no more. So anyway, kicked him out, found another roommate, didn't work out. I told him, hey, man, I'm sorry, but this just ain't working out. I'll give you till the end of the month, but I need you to get all your stuff by the end of the month and get out. And I got home and all of his stuff was already gone. Like that day, I just sent a message to him that morning like, hey, man, I'm about to go to work, but I'll give you to the end of the month to get all your stuff, but this ain't working out. And he got all of his stuff and he was gone by the end of the day. Really nice guy. Really nice guy. Just didn't work out. There was some situations with long story. Doesn't matter. There was a girl that was coming over. There was a girl that used to try to hook up with me, and I didn't fuck with her like that. So then she started, like, hooking up with him because he was the roommate or whatever. And that was awkward as shit, and it was just a weird situation. But that's where that all came from. And then I ended up getting another roommate who was literally like best roommate that I had for the longest time. Blair, she and I are from the same hometown. We're both from Bennettsville, and we lived together, me and her, for years. Like like literally one of the greatest roommates I've ever had was Blair. Blair was at the house tonight that I was literally like having a really, really, really dark thoughts and talking really crazily and trying to act out crazy things that people should never act out. And she caught me in the middle of doing something one night, and it really freaked her out, and she didn't feel safe, and she left to go stay with her parents. But at this point, I was drinking every single night, constantly boozed up, 100%, all the time. And I ended up, like, that was like the lowest point at that point. That was my lowest point. But I just remember, like, sitting over the trash can, like cutting up shotgun shells with a knife as she was walking out of the house with clothes, like with like a weekend bag. And I'm literally just cutting up shotgun shells as if to say, hey, I'm not going to use these things. But in her eyes, she sees a psychopath sitting over a drunk psychopath sitting over a trash can, like sawing open shotgun shells. So that happened. And then shortly after that, like I ended up, like after that happened, it was kind of like a big wake up call for me. And like she, like I pretty much had like this conversation with her where I apologized profusely and kind of gave her I'm in a really bad spot. Like, will you please stay with me? Like, I kind of need you here. And God love her. God love Blair. She stayed. And I got out of that spot that I was in for a really long time. And she ended up getting in a relationship, and they ended up getting their own place. So I had an empty room, and by this time I was like doing all right. So I was like, I think I can float the house by myself now. I'll just keep it to myself until I find a roommate worth having. And then I ended up getting another roommate who a lot of back home folks are going to know who this is, but just because of some of these quick stories I'm going to tell, I'm going to remain nameless. He's going to remain nameless. But he moved in with me, and he enjoyed the powder. And I had only messed around with the powder like maybe once or twice in my life at this point. But he enjoyed it, and he was pretty much like an everyday user at this point in our lives. And he started bringing it home, and I would start messing around with it a little bit with him. And like it started to, like, there was somebody who I was like kind of in love with. There was a girl that I was just kind of in love with, but just to be honest with y'all, I'm kind of a bitch about stuff like that. Like, if I like somebody, I could be absolutely head over heels in love with somebody for years, and I would never actually come out and say it because I'm just so fucking scared that they're not going to return my love, and I am going to end up sitting outside on the front porch step with my suitcase next to me, not getting picked up again, all back to the mom shit. I know that it didn't make sense when I was going through all of that. Why is he rambling about this bullshit? It all goes back to things like that. Like, I'm so sure that I'm going to be abandoned by a female that I love, because that's what my mom did to me first. So she has trained me subconsciously and genetically to expect to be abandoned by those that I love, especially the females that I love. I don't have that with like my boys. Like I don't have that with my friends or anything like any of the guy relationships I have in my life. It's always been the female relationships where I'm just like, this girl is going to abandon me. So it's probably best that I don't tell her how I feel so that she can abandon me. And so then I just aggressively end up friend zoned every single time. Like without there's no gray area. It's every time. But ended up being really in love with this girl, and I got very jealous because she was spending more time with my new roommate than she was spending with me. Like those times whenever she would I used to get those texts, hey, come to Bubba's, let's get appetizers. And I stopped getting those texts, and I would notice my roommate leaving. What are you doing? He's like, oh, she just texted me. I'm going to go down to Bubba's and get some appetizers. And I'm sitting there like, yo, like, this like really cut me deep. And I got upset about that. And it all culminated and I started drinking very heavily over the course of the next couple months. And one night it all culminated to me literally just, I got in a pretty big fight with one of my friends, like after I gave him a ride home drunk as shit. And then we ended up like fighting in his yard, like rolling around and shit. And like I ended up with a lot of his blood on my shirt. And it wasn't because we fought like that. He cracked his head open on a table, and like I was carrying him and shit. But like he was trying to like wrestle and play fight, but I got mad because I don't like to fuck around like that. And so we started like fighting. But we were two giants, dude. Just like two fucking grizzly bears fucking going at it in the yard. But anyway, that night I ended up just flipping out on everybody and like really embarrassing myself in front of all of my friends, drunk as fuck. And I took all of the anger that I had and all of this resentment and all of these things that I'd been holding up that had been boiling over for months and months, and it just all spilled out. And I'm just like calling everybody out for what they're doing and just being an absolute psychopath, like acting in a way that a madman acts. And that last night, I kept going around slapping the shit out of people, dude. I would slap all of my friends just to see if anybody would slap me back. And they never would. Nobody would slap me back. And that was their way of telling me they couldn't be my friend. Like, if you don't slap me back, that means we're not the same. And that night, I remembered I just kept like, oh, nobody wants to hit me, I'll hit me then. So I started like punching myself in the face. Like I was like literally hitting myself. I was as hard as I could, dude. I was beating the shit out of myself that night. I probably gave myself, I don't even know how many concussions, dude. I just kept punching myself in the face. I literally beat the fuck out of myself, dude. I had like black eyes. It was rough. So after I did that night, I woke up the next morning just like, I don't know if any of y'all ever been in a fight. But the next morning when you wake up, if you've been punched in the face a bunch, it don't feel good. Like, it is not a good feeling. And I remember just waking up the next day just feeling like I beat myself to a pulp. And this was on a Sunday that I did all that shit. That was a Sunday night. that was we had a gig. We had a gig that morning at 11. Like, me and my roommate had gotten into a hardcore the night before, like screaming at each other in the house that night on like it was a coke fueled drunken night, and we were just screaming at each other and shit over some bullshit. It was probably over old girl, because that was really what was all that was really bothering me back then was shit involving her. And I remember the next morning I did that gig. We had an 11:45 to 12:30 set, and then we had a 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock set. And they were like pretty close to each other. And we didn't have to bring anything but instruments to the first one or to the second one. They were both soundboard gigs, so like we had a sound guy there at both spots. All we had to do was bring our instruments, and we were good. So we did Bloody Mary competition, oyster roast, and we would get, I don't like tomato juice, so we got drink tickets, and I would just go up to all of the things and just be like, hey, give me the vodka you would put in a Bloody Mary. I don't want a Bloody Mary. I don't like tomato juice. Just give me the vodka. And like, and they were like, I don't even care. Give it to me hot. I don't give a fuck. So I like taking probably like, I don't know, and I'm not even exaggerating. I was heavily into it. I'd probably drank a quarter of a bottle of vodka by 12, 12:30 when I got off stage for sure. I was at least a quarter bottle of vodka down. Quarter, like a 750 milliliter bottle, quarter of that. So then I go on to Dead Dog, and I just started drinking. I ended up taking a shot of Rumplemints next to old girl who worked at that bar. And I literally threw up in a trash can. And I remember seeing one of the bar backs and just being like, hey, I just yacked in this. Get this out of here. So I did that. Threw up, kept drinking. I think they gave us the axe. They told us that we were good, that we didn't have to play anymore because I was so drunk. I was just bad on stage. It was terrible. I'd like to see footage of that. I know a lot of people have footage of that. I'd just like to see it. But anyway, yeah, just went out. That's how the night started. That's how the day started. And then all that shit that went down that I just told you guys about, me getting hammered ass drunk and just like making an absolute fool out of myself in front of everybody, and then punching myself in the face later in the night after calling all of my friends out, and then calling the girl that I'd been in love with for a long time, all these names, whore, and all this shit, for just because like she like kind of left me for my roommate. And in my defense, I did kind of say, hey man, I really like this girl a lot. I don't know how to go about moving this relationship into the next stage of it, but like, do what you want with anybody, but just like, please, just for my sake, like I don't know how to go about this, but I love this girl. So in my defense, I kind of did lead it out like that when we first became roommates. And I don't know, I just felt immensely disrespected by the whole situation and all that shit. So I came out of the house for trivia the next night. I had to go on the apology tour and tell everybody I was fucking sorry. And of course, because I'm me, everybody of course forgave me. And then the shots kept coming around, and I was like, you know what, man, I'm good. I'm not drinking tonight. I'm gonna take the night off. So I took Monday off from drinking. And then the next night I had a solo gig also at Dead Dog Saloon. So the last gig that I did Sunday, where I made an absolute fool out of myself, worst gig I'd ever played in my life, was probably that Sunday. And then until I played on Tuesday, which was the first gig I had done sober in a long time. And I did that gig sober as a bird, and I walked up to the sound guy, Jay Hodge, and I was like, man, I could walk over there at that bar and I could get me a rumple, and I could just go on stage and I could turn it on and I could be me again. And he said, well, you know, there ain't nothing wrong with drinking, but if it's something that you really want to do and you're really trying to do it, just finish this gig. Just get through this day. And that's what I did. I got through that day, and it was the worst gig I had played. There was a lady who was screaming at me from out in the crowd, like telling me that I sucked, telling me that I was terrible, and it was bad. Like, I was doing bad. She was right. I did suck, and it was terrible. But, yeah, it was really bad. And I couldn't, I mean, I was ashamed of myself. But all that being said, that was the last day that I drank. I really embarrassed myself in front of a lot of people. That was Leap Day. That was February 29th, 2016, that day. And the gig that I was talking about was literally March the 2nd. And I never drank again. I never took another sip of another alcoholic beverage after that, ever again. And I did get really involved in the powder, though. And getting involved in the powder, I was getting crazy, man. I was staying up all night and then going and doing gigs the next day without any sleep, and then just carrying a bag with me everywhere I went for about a year. And just literally dwindling my life down to just absolute misery. And then one day, after about a year of doing that, where it got really crazy, I was probably doing I would get an 8-ball every other day, and that 8-ball would usually last me most of 2 days. Most of 2 days, an 8-ball would last me. But then after that, I ended up just getting about $150 worth, like three $50 grams of what inevitably became meth. I was what I was doing there towards the end. But I was just doing that shit and just staying awake, looking out the window of my apartment, recording another album. I recorded another album in my apartment back home called the Tell Me Darling. And Tell Me Darling was a 5-song EP that I wrote with a few songs that I wrote, and I still do those songs. Right after I stopped drinking and started doing a lot of coke, I started writing a lot of interesting music. And it's some of the work that I'm unfortunately most proud of. And I hate that some of the stuff that I'm most proud of I wrote on coke, but oy vey. Yeah, so I recorded that album in there, Tell Me Darling. I my roommate, I told him, like, I was like, man, like, he ended up moving out. He ended up moving out, and which was for the best, because, like, I remembered I quit doing the powder, but I wrote all of these songs on the powder, and then I did it while I was recording. I like all of those songs that I recorded, I was just coked out of my mind while I was recording them, or methed out of my mind while I was recording them. And that had the effect on the brain that it has, and just creates all of the delusions of all this other stuff that's not really happening that you think is happening. And then that just got to be too heavy, and I decided that it was time for me to, like, maybe, you know what, one more argument with my roommate over this shit. Like, yeah, I had some on the plate while you were not here. No, I didn't save you any. No, you're not entitled to half of what I have left. No, I'm not going to give you this powder that I spent my money on, because I know you did everything that you had in your pocket while you were gone. So I'm not going to share with you what I have left, because you have not been nice enough to do that with me. Though we did share a lot. So I mean, like, but that's just where my brain was at the time. And yeah, so I realized that I don't want to do this anymore, and I just stopped. And I don't even remember the date because I didn't think that it would be the last time. I just remember not doing it anymore and thinking, wow, this is just what I'm like. I didn't need that, and I quit that. And once I quit doing the powder, that was when I started setting up a camera and talking to a camera about all of my problems. And I started calling it the MI stuff, Merle's Inlet stuff, where I would just tell stories about things happening in Merle's Inlet. But after a while, it just got, it started to where I would just talk like this for hours, sometimes 3 hours. I would just sit and I would talk, and I would just unload everything that was in my mind. I used it as therapy. I learned things about myself. A lot of those stories that I told you guys in this episode already is stuff that I remembered. After you quit drinking after having drank as heavily as I did for so long, certain memories start to come back. And I started to unbox all of these things. I started to unbox all these thoughts that I had in my mind. And in doing that, I learned intimately who I was. And I started to tweak myself a bit. I started to like try and put little things into action. I started to get better. I started to get better with money. I started to get better musically. People started to come up to me and say, "Man, you guys were always fun, but now you're good." You know? So the band started getting better. We were sharper. We started playing gigs in a different way. And that was, we had a really good run of being the party band. And then one day I just stopped drinking, and we literally, after that point, and I can say this without reservation, that we became one of the most powerful bands in the Myrtle Beach area. And that's just all there was to it. And I was proud of that. I am still proud of that. I'm very proud of the work that we did as a band. But I was very much proud of the fact that I quit something that I needed to quit, and then I picked up a habit that I shouldn't have picked up in quitting the booze, but then inevitably quit that as well. So, and I made it through the other side. And so I know what it's like to have a crippling booze addiction. I know what it's like to have a crippling coke addiction and ergo meth addiction. So I know what it's like to be addicted to all of those things and to come out of it. And so when I see people now that struggle with things like that, especially the powder, when I see people who struggle with the powder, and they don't even see it as a struggle, they just see it as like a way of life. It's a fun thing that we do. It's a fun thing, but they don't even see it as they are struggling with this thing. They just see it as a fun thing that they do it when they're hanging out with their friends. But it's a struggle, and it will fool you into thinking that it isn't, but it is. But that's why whenever I see them in that struggle, I might have a knee-jerk reaction at them personally, but it's really just a reaction of who I was. It's me reacting to myself when I was at that point in my addiction. When I was where they are now in my addiction, in my mind, I'm reacting to that version of me because I see that version of me just hiding there in them. And I shouldn't do that, but I do, unfortunately. And that might explain a lot of how I treat certain people or how I look at certain people. And I don't mean to do that, but that's why this episode is necessary, and all the information that I've given, and we've almost gone for 3 hours, and I am wrapping this up. But all of this information that I've given you guys, I really want those who interact with me in short snippets and just out front of Sunset or just like at work, they don't know this person. And I really want you guys to know this person because it's important. And I really want these podcasts that I do going forward to be really fun and silly, but it was necessary, very necessary for you guys to hear all of this so that will make more sense, so that now going forward, okay, you know all of this stuff. So this is what, you know all of this stuff, so let's just push this away. That way I never have to go back to it again. Or if I ever make reference to any of this stuff, then you'll know what I'm talking about. But anyway, yeah. After I quit doing the powder and I started to get on top of my finances and on top of my life a little more, I was doing the podcast, and I started just looking at a camera just like I'm doing right now. And guys, doing this thing that I've done for the last 3 hours is what saved my life. First, this was the first thing that saved my life. Getting interested in podcasting and doing research on the most popular podcasts, seeing what do they do, what do they do that I could be doing that would make this better, and then finding the Joe Rogan podcast and watching every episode live, and then watching Ron White live talk about going down to the Comedy Store to see Kill Tony and be on that show, and then me watching that live stream of Kill Tony that night with Ron White, leading me into the Kill Tony universe, leading me into the Kill Tony Discord, which led me into a relationship online with Tony and Red Band, leading me into VR, leading me into becoming really good friends with Red Band, and then my brother getting involved in Screwball Whiskey, and then me and my brother and Tony on a video call negotiating the Screwball Whiskey sponsoring the Kill Tony band. A lot of people don't know that. I kind of did that. But like, just leading me down all of these paths, me stopping those things and getting into just talking to this camera for as long as I've talked into it is literally what saved my life and allowed me to live the life that I'm living right now, which I honestly wouldn't trade for the world. Even the struggle, even the being broke, even the getting all the notifications every single day that, oh, your Venmo balance is too low to cover your $5 and something purchase. Like, even that, I take that and I appreciate that, because I know that it's not going to be that forever. And one day, whenever I'm one day when I am in this point of of comfort that I've looked for, I can look back at these moments and remember these times when I was struggling like this and truly appreciate how far I've come in my career and in my life. And I'm pretty excited about that, but I am trying my best to not how do I say, I'm trying my best to I don't know, man. I'm just trying my best to to I don't know. I think I've hit a wall mentally is what I'm trying to say. And I kind of looped all the way back around from the beginning of just staring into this camera and talking to you guys for a little bit, and into just basically giving you guys about a 3-hour story of my life, so that you'll understand how I am the way that I am, so that when we go forward in these episodes, that it'll make a little more sense as to how I react to things the way that I do, or why I feel the way that I feel about certain things, and just allows me to make references back to these stories that you guys know now. So yeah. But I just want, whenever I get back, to get to that point where I feel I've reached a level of comfort that I'm happy with, I want to have remembered these times and remember this struggle, and remember that I stuck it out and I made it work. And because I did that, I got to where I wanted to go. And I guess that if I'm going to leave anything real with you, is that after all that stuff that I've been through, and all that hard shit that was probably really hard to listen to in the first hour of this talk, I've still ended up somehow making my life comfortable enough to get to the point that I'm at right now in it. So I know that a lot of people out there have probably gone through a lot of similar things that they've heard me talk about. And I guess this is hokey to say, but just like, I have been there and I got to the other side of it, and you can too and will. And I'd be more than happy to if anybody wanted to talk about any of this stuff, like, reach out to me. I'm very an open book when it comes to this stuff. Like, seriously, I have no problem. Like, if anybody is going through any of these issues that you've heard me talk about, like, I really want, and I don't want to say things like I want people to better themselves as if to insinuate that I am better than anyone, because that's not what I mean by that. I would love to assist someone in stepping closer to a person that they would be happier with on their terms, not mine. So anyway, I don't even know what time it is, but I will say that I started recording this episode at about 6 o'clock in the morning, maybe a little after 6 o'clock in the morning, and I've been going for 3 hours, so I'm guessing that this is a little after 9 a.m. Worked a really long shift at work, and ended up being sick and home all day on Friday. So it is now Sunday morning. And I needed to get all of this out. if you made it to this point in the podcast, kudos to you, because these were some murky waters that we had to traverse today. And thank you for letting me unload all this nonsense into your ear holes. I know that it wasn't fun in moments, and to be honest, I'll be surprised if a lot of you get to this point. But if you do me a favor, and in the chat, not the chat, in the comments, leave a lightning bolt. Leave a lightning bolt in the chat if you made it to this point at the end. I want to see, just for my my own studies. I'm so sleepy that my brain is shutting down, so I'm just going to go ahead and get out of here before I defile myself any further. Guys, seriously, thank you guys so much for being here and being part of this thing. Please like this video. Please subscribe to my channel. And also follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts, which I don't even know what the name is yet, but I do know that I'm going to be uploading it everywhere that podcasts are available in audio form, as well as obviously the video here. So there's that, guys. There's the first doozy of an episode. So now I have no excuse to go down these dark holes, to go down these dark roads and into these murky waters ever again. So we've gotten it out of the way right out of the gate, and that's that. So be good people. It's not that hard. Do something nice for someone this week. And don't tell anyone that you did it. Just do it. Let it be between you and the person you did it for. And then just move on with your life. If you enjoy the way that doing that thing makes you feel, then continue to do that. All I ask is once a week. That's all you have to do. Just once a week. Something nice for somebody, and don't tell a soul that you did it. Just do it and move along with your life. Thank you guys so much for letting me unload all this nonsense on you. And I promise you that this, if you've made it through this, the rest of them are going to be a cakewalk. Trust me. Roll Tide, everybody. Thanks for watching.